Hello, everybody, and welcome to Self Publishing Insiders. I'm your host, Jim Azevedo. I have the pleasure of leading marketing and corporate communications here at Draft Digital. And today it is my honor to welcome Jane Friedman to the show. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jim. It's great to be here.
We're so happy to have you. I was telling Jane backstage that I feel almost guilty because I have Jane all to myself this time, and she's not in the conference atmosphere or on a panel with a bunch of other people. Which is all ours, everybody. So I want to inform the audience that you guys, Jane's here. So if you have questions about the industry, trends, issues, predictions, this is your show. So please feel free to chime in, ask your questions there in the comments, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. For the uninitiated, if anyone out there isn't familiar with Jane, Jane Friedman has spent 25 years working in the publishing industry with a focus on business reporting and author education. Her book, The Business of Being a Writer, from the University of Chicago Press, received a starred review from Library Journal and is used as classroom text by many writing and publishing degree programs. A second edition releases this spring, which I have pre-ordered through Apple Books. And I also want to mention that it's not in Jane's biography here, but the business of being a writer is approaching 400 reviews on Amazon and is averaging well above 4.5 stars. So congratulations on that, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course. So for our audience out there, I thought I would sort of break up this conversation or this episode into three parts. The first part, talking about changes that are afoot with Jane's very popular The Hot Sheet newsletter. And then in part two, I want to talk about the book, The Business of Being a Writer, and then the second edition, which is coming out April 18th, I believe.
hmm
Okay, and then after that, we'll move into part three, which is change, we'll change trends and issues that are impacting the book publishing
Yeah.
industry. So with that, can we talk about the hot sheet? Can you describe for our viewers, just what is the hot sheet? When did it start? What motivated you to start this major project?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the newsletter started 10 years ago. It started off as a partner project with me and another journalist in the publishing industry. And our goal was to help writers understand what was happening, what changes were happening
Hmm.
on a business level primarily. Because when I would be at conferences or speaking to writers or just fielding emails, uh, I don't think this has changed since 10 years ago, but there was a lot of confusion about what exactly
What?
is happening. Um, a lot
That
of
hasn't changed.
that has not
Well,
changed. A lot of anxiety, a lot of misinformation, a lot of, let's say, not the best sources, gossip, rumor spreading around, and so the point of the publication is to help people stay up to date on the industry without having to sift through, lots of different sources to figure out which who is correct here.
yeah.
So I like to think of it as a 360-degree view of what's happening. I don't
Hmm.
with authors at the center. That's always been kind of the North Star. So whether
Hmm.
it's traditional publishing or self-publishing or something changing with distribution or retail, we're always thinking about, or I'm always thinking now, it's just my publication now. I'm always thinking about how does this affect the author and how might this
Yeah.
affect their business going forward?
That's very obvious when you read through the hot sheet, which is required reading as far as I'm concerned for anybody who is planning to make a career out of their writing. And it comes out every 2 weeks, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Although
How many?
I was just gonna say that's
uh,
changing, but I know we're gonna get to that.
we're gonna get to that. How many sources do you review, or do you look at prior to each issue?
Oh gosh. I would say if you count every single, like, newsletter that I subscribe to, it's well over 100. Um, That's not saying I'm reading them word for word, but
So
I
that
scan
wasn't a
them.
typo that I read on the website. I'm like, "Oh my what? Oh my god."
No, it's not a typo. In fact, you can kinda get a little bit of an idea of who I follow by just going to my Substack profile, because so many people are on Substack and writing
Yeah,
industry stuff on Substack. So there are more than 100 listed there, and that doesn't even get into all of the sources that aren't on Substack. Some of them are international, some of them are
yep,
technology driven, some of them are, like, media driven rather than publishing driven, because obviously those areas affect, publishing and writing too. AI, hello?
yeah.
So, I'm trying to stay apprised of all of, various, publishing adjacent sectors.
How do you distill all of that information? Because again, like the frequency of the publication, I know as of right now it's every 2 weeks, but
Mhm.
still, that's not a lot of time to go through it. I mean, there's just so much information coming at us daily.
Yes,
Do you have
yes.
a huge staff of people who are helping you out?
Well,
Uh,
it's true that, it's I do have some help, which it mainly takes the form of my husband, who joined my business in 2019.
Okay.
He's not doing any writing and reporting, but he takes care of the administrative, the back end, the customer service, and what I would call the production of the newsletter. So, like, he loads
Mhm.
it into the email service provider and onto the website, and he handles all of the little bits and pieces, so I can just focus on, the information gathering, research, and reporting of the material. I also have a copy editor and someone who's, like, fact checking behind me,
Mhm.
and then I do occasionally have contributors. So, in fact,
Yeah.
there's one contributed column each time that's about a title that's appeared on a bestseller list. So those things, of course, offer a lot of support, and I that allows me to focus just on current events, what's happening right now, and what's worth actually talking about. Because there's so much noise. I mean, I would say about at least half, if not 60 to 70% of what I sift through, it's not
Mhm.
worth mentioning to a writer. It's not gonna matter in a week or 2 weeks or maybe 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very apparent when you go through the newsletter, when it comes out every week as a reader, I'm thinking, "Okay, I can see where this matters," and sometimes you just tell them like, "This is why it matters to you and to your
Right.
career, and this is what it means long term." That's really interesting. Why and you mentioned in the hot sheet, that came out yesterday that there are some changes coming up for the hot
Yes.
sheet. So
Yes.
what's changing? It's not going away, is it? What's going on? Let us know.
So it's not going away,
Okay.
but the newsletter hasn't changed that much since it came out initially in 2015 when I had a business
Mhm.
partner. And, so it's retained the same name, the same format. There have been modest changes, but nothing dramatic. And especially with the new edition of my book coming out this spring, which we'll discuss, I felt like it was time for a much needed realignment where everything is concentrated at my main website, which I'm most well
Mm.
known for. That's janefriedman.com. Because I also have material that's actively publishing there. That's where people generally sign up for the stuff that I offer.
Mhm.
And a lot of people can't even remember the name of this paid newsletter. People get it wrong all the time, which I'm
Really?
not offended. Oh, yes, and I'm not offended by it. It's just like I know there's so much out there. It's hard to like remember. Um, but people don't forget my name. So ultimately, what's going to happen is everything's going to come under the branding of my name. The name of the
Okay.
newsletter, which will change, and I'm also going to make it weekly because the
Mm.
newsletter is just getting too long, to be frank. It's like, I think I call in the recent issue, I said it kind of lands in your inbox like a lead balloon because
You did say that.
I hear from readers, they're like, "Yeah, I save it for when I have the time," or "I don't always get to all of it," and, it's a
That's not such a
problem.
bad thing, though. I mean,
But
because
I want people to read it. I want people to read it.
we
But yes,
do, but it's very thorough.
yes.
I mean, you do the work, and it's so obvious that you do the work behind the scenes to and not only inform us, educate us, but to get rid of all the unnecessary bits. You really do get to the point. So
Yeah. So I do think the nature of like the reporting and the research that I'm doing, none of that's going to change. But I think by going weekly, it won't be as much to go through each time. And so there'll be like one long form piece per issue along with lots of updates that people need to know about.
Okay. Is the subscription price going to remain the same, or is it changing as well?
It's remaining the same.
Okay. What is that? I mean, do you mind?
Oh, sure. It's $79 per year, and that's if
Yeah.
you have access to the archive, and that's the pricing that's going to, be moving forward once everything switches over to the site. There is a cheaper level currently, which I'm not gonna offer, that's email only, but
Okay.
after the switchover, just 79.
Well, that's a bargain. I mean, that's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. Um, are you gonna let us know what the name change is gonna be? Is it gonna be based on your name?
It's
You
gonna
could,
be
I mean, you don't have to tell us that.
It's gonna be based on my name.
Okay.
So I'll leave it at that. I would say about 2 weeks, everyone's gonna know exactly what the change is.
Excellent, excellent. I just want to say really quickly that I see a bunch of questions coming in already. So thanks to the audience out there. Keep them coming, and I promise we'll get to them. Um, I knew people were looking forward to you being on the show, Jane. That's excellent. Is there anything else that you wanted to add about the hot sheet before we move into the next topic?
No, let's move on.
All right. So the next thing we were going to talk about is you have this big book release coming up. The second edition of The Business of Being a Writer is coming out on April 18th. You
Mhm.
can order it now on pre-order. I did. I know I mentioned that earlier. Now, when it came to the first edition, just how massive of an endeavor was the first edition? Because when you go through it, even if you're just looking at the table of contents, it is just so thoughtfully organized, and how it's broken up into 5 different parts. So can we start there? Just
Mhm.
was it just a massive years-long project for you?
I would say it took me around a year to write it.
Really?
I would say it was essentially like doing a brain dump, and not all of the
Okay.
material was, let's say, 100% from scratch because I've been writing and reporting on the industry for so long. I've
Mhm.
got quite an archive of content. I have so many classes. I did something with the great courses where I essentially had to write out a transcript of every single lecture, and I had the rights to reuse that material in written form. So that also helped me, um, you know, get the book done in the space of a year. And so it really goes through I was approached by the publisher to do a book like this. I didn't necessarily I My dirty secret is I actually don't like writing books. It's very long process.
Well, heard it
Um,
here first, folks.
it's it's more work than I wanna do.
Yeah,
So,
we understand.
it's, so the publisher wanted something that would really be used in the creative writing classroom to help,
Yeah.
especially degree-seeking students understand what it was gonna
Mm,
take, to earn a living from their writing or to pursue writing meaningfully as a career. And so I kinda
mhm,
go through not just book publishing, but also magazine publishing and the online media space. And then I also get into things like business models and what it means to earn a living from your writing because at least for anyone who's traditionally publishing, it's
yeah,
almost never through book sales. That's not where the money's coming from, not initially anyway.
mhm,
And so you have to move through those early difficult years in a way that gives you it has to be sustainable. You have to, like, essentially build up a backlist, or build up a brand or build up a platform that will then
mhm.
become much easier, to monetize the further you get into your career.
Yeah. Um, we talked a little bit before we went on camera about I was telling you that I've met so many authors through the years here. Some of them never expected to become successful. They were just following their passions,
Mhm.
writing book after book after book, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, hey, my books are selling.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh, I have a
yeah.
business. Like I don't know what to do next, and that's what really struck me about the book and its organization and how you laid it out. Now, I noticed that book one, or the first edition, is broken into 5 parts, or it's organized into 5 parts. Where the part one is covering the basics, the first steps. Part two is understanding the publishing industry, and like as you've already covered, it's more than books, everybody.
Yep.
Um, Part three is the longest section, getting published. It's
Mhm.
very thorough. You cover all of the different approaches, and it offers just a ton of how-to advice, covering the traditional approach, the indie approach, freelance, and even more. And then part four and five are super interesting because then you're starting to move into the writer as an entrepreneur
Mhm.
and how writers make money. So I wanted to ask you, why now? Why now for the second edition of the book? It's 10 years later.
Mhm.
It's not like anything's happened during the past 10 years.
Well, I
But
mean, this so why the second edition now? I mean,
yeah,
the
yeah.
most direct answer is my publisher said it was time. Um, but I
Darn
also
publishers.
I know, obviously, there were things in the book that were becoming dated, especially whenever I was talking about online media, social media, those
Yeah.
elements of platform building and marketing. It's you know, the I don't feel like you can have a lot of confidence in that book when you see all of the mentions of things that don't exist anymore.
Mm.
And, I wasn't even thinking at the time I need to future proof this book, although to some extent I don't think that's
How do you
possible.
though? Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing that happened, aside from just changes in the industry and in the media, especially with the magazine industry, huge changes there. I was thinking about how writers build a career differently. So over the last decade, the way I like to teach or the way I like to try to set expectations, all of that has shifted. And so that means the organization of the book has shifted as well. In a nutshell, because I don't want to spend too much time going through the technical bits.
Mm.
I feel like mindset is perhaps one of the most important things going into this. And I know that often mindset and business issues, people don't link those two things. But if you
You mean the
don't go
mindset of your reader or the mindset of you as the author of this
you
of the
as the
book?
author,
Okay.
the mindset of you as a writer, what it means to be pursuing writing as a career, what it
Okay.
means to earn money from your career, um, because the industry and all of the voices or opinions you're gonna hear, there is so much cynicism and negativity and, there's so many stumbling blocks. Some of them are internal, some of them are external. But I find
Mhm.
that these tend to short circuit people at very early stages before they've even really given something a chance.
Hmm.
So I address some of those mindset issues up front, and then I go into platform building, for better or worse.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time even just talking about platform today because I think it's overemphasized, and there's so many bad messages surrounding author platform that continue,
Mhm.
all the time, especially from the major media, like saying, "Oh, you now have to be on TikTok in order to be a successful author," which is false.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I have to address the elephant in the room before we can move forward, and so I
Mhm.
address the platform issue in its own part before moving
Okay.
on to things like, "Here's how the industry works. Here's how you get published. Here's how you build a business model."
Yeah, love it. And I like how you addressed mindset first because I would assume that a lot of authors who go through that session or through that part of the book are like, "Oh, okay, she hears me. I'm seen and I'm not alone." And I thought that, "Oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to do this." And here you are saying, "Yes, you can. There are a lot of authors like you who have done it before."
Yes, yes, it's possible. I think a lot of people put too much stock in things like talent,
Mhm.
or trying to figure out if they have what it takes, and it's like, on some level, you're never gonna know if you have talent or if you have what it takes. You just have to start practicing, like practicing the writing, practicing the business, rather than
Yeah.
getting caught up in the existential, um, like circling the drain of the existential issues and the self-doubt and all the rest of it.
Yeah, because then you're paralyzed and you have to
Right.
embrace, just know that it's not going to be good the first time around, the first draft, and you've probably heard, I've heard from so many best-selling authors who have said time and time again, the first draft is just awful, like god awful. They wouldn't want anybody to see it, but they get it out of their
Yeah,
heads and onto the paper, and then they can kind of mold it from
yeah,
there.
exactly.
Okay. I'm looking forward to it. It's 2 months seems like such a long time, so I want to get my hands on this book. Shall we switch gears yet again and talk
Yes,
about what's kind of going on in the industry?
absolutely.
All right, let's do that. And let's start this time. Usually, I'm so guilty of kind of like taking over the conversation, getting all my questions answered. So this time, I want to start with questions and comments from our audience out there. Start here with John. Hey, John, thanks for joining today. John asks, what are you hearing about how our new administration's philosophy may impact the book business?
So I would say that the 2 biggest concerns, maybe 3 biggest concerns
Hmm.
are tariffs,
Okay.
book bans or book challenges, uh, and then funding, especially like
Yeah.
National Endowment for the Arts, nonprofit types of funding. I'm not saying it's limited to those 3 areas, but those are like, I would say the 3 biggest top of mind.
Yeah.
The tariffs is something, something that has been dealt with before when, the Trump administration had its first term, so in 2016. So there were tariffs placed on products coming from China, and for those who don't know, traditional publishing in particular relies a lot on Chinese printing, and so when those tariffs were applied, there it was also, towards the end of that, administration, we had the pandemic, which was making things even more complicated for sourcing, printing, paper, ink, other materials, the container sh I think everyone might remember the container ships just sitting
Oh,
around.
yeah.
Um, so there was a lot of upheaval, which actually, because of all of that, I think the industry, generally speaking, has become more adaptable, flexible, has sought out other ways of getting things done on the production side to help protect themselves in the event of, let's say, another round of tariffs.
Mhm.
So I think one of the biggest concerns I'm hearing about, and I'm not personally affected by this because I'm not involved in gathering raw materials for books, so I have to rely on other people and
Thankfully.
what they're saying. Um, but what what would be most harmful is if I believe is if tariffs were to be applied to Canadian paper or inks coming in because
Mm.
it's not something where the US market is suddenly going to be able to produce these papers or inks that Canada has been providing us with. So it's who does it serve? Because it's not gonna move manufacturing to the US. So I think that so far, though, it looks like that might be off the table, but who knows? This is part of why, the administration is, let's say, not exactly, orderly, so you just never know what's gonna happen next, and so if you follow the book industry study group, they're having consistent sessions for publishers and other people who procure
Yeah.
materials about here's what we do if A happens or if B happens or if XYZ happens. So keep an eye on the tariffs for the book
Yeah.
materials issue. Canadians are also worried about what would happen if their books uh, have tariffs applied coming into the country, which of course they do not want to see.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so the second issue are the book challenges, the book bans. Even the
Mm.
term itself is political. Um, but just I think everyone has seen that there are a number of lawsuits that are underway by the
Yeah.
publishers themselves, the Big 5 publishers, the Authors Guild, even specific authors like John Green who have been affected. So for those who don't know, there are some states like Idaho, Florida, Iowa, Texas. They've put into place laws that pull books out of school libraries or out of public libraries for certain types of content, usually sexual content,
Mhm.
LGBTQ content.
Yeah.
And in Idaho in particular, it's a very broad law that was put into place. It's a book with sexual content, period, regardless of
Mhm.
literary merit. And so in some cases, because of the threat of librarians, losing their jobs, or, in some states, I think there's even threat of imprisonment. Let's hope that would never happen. But
Yeah.
because it's so hard for them to follow the rules or do what's required, they just take the books down indefinitely and they remove them from the shelves. And so not even, even the adults have a hard time accessing these books. So anyway, we're seeing lawsuits against these sorts of laws. And in Florida, the publishers actually, at this point, have kind of won their case. And I believe the schools, I think it was school libraries, were forced to kind of back down on some level because of First Amendment issues.
Mhm.
So I think we're going to continue to see these things play out. We're not going to see the Department of Justice continue their cases, because when Biden was in office, of course, he was um, part of fighting these laws in the states. But as soon as Trump came
Mhm.
into office, he stopped all of that. But that doesn't mean the publishers or the
Yeah.
authors are going to stop bringing those cases. All right, so we're watching those, and
Okay.
there is fear in the writing community that, especially from romance authors, anyone who's writing material that has sexual content in it, there's fear that their materials are going to somehow be prevented from sale or being available in libraries. It'll be somehow classified as pornography. I don't think the laws are really reaching in that direction. I could be wrong, but I don't see that coming to pass. I think right now we're really looking at school libraries and public libraries being most affected. Um, and then the third issue is funding. So, for
Yeah.
example, the National Endowment for the Arts just really changed everything that they're doing for the upcoming grants. They had like a Challenge America grant that was supposed to focus on underrepresented communities. That's all gone
Mhm.
now. They're now focusing on grants that they're seeking grants that would celebrate the 250th anniversary of America. And so they're going to actually hold, for those who are interested in NEA grants, they're actually holding an informational session next week for anyone, like a Zoom, if you want to hear about the new guidelines and requirements. And I don't believe this was part of the requirements before. I think this is new and in line with Trump's new executive orders,
Mhm.
that if you're applying for a grant, you can't have any sort of DEI program, or you have to abide by all of the executive orders that he has issued thus far. So, it's an interesting time to be a nonprofit in the arts, especially if you're looking for government funding. But I guess I take, for those who care about the NEA, and I do, I've served on some of these grant panels that offer funding to writers and literary organizations. So I've seen the process up close. I know what this money means to these organizations.
Mhm.
Um, I'm at least heartened that the NEA is not on the chopping block, that it appears like it's going to continue to be funding the arts so far. Um, but we'll see. I think it's kind of chaotic. You don't know day to day exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah. God, and not to mention just the sheer amount of information and news that's coming in. The news cycle is it's off the charts. It's so
Right.
exhausting.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine just doing what you're doing and trying to distill all this information for the rest of us
It's
out
it's
there.
really this is like the political situation right now as far as its intersection with publishing.
Mhm.
Um, I would say at the moment it's 90% noise. Um, for me, as someone who's trying to help writers understand what's happening, I think actually one of the greatest services I can provide is only saying something when I think when I have some like really large degree of confidence that it's gonna matter,
Yeah.
because I think if I were trying to keep up day to day with all of the little changes, most of them I don't think would matter in a month. I recently read an article that said, back in December, if you had went into a coma on December 1 and woke up on December 31, you would actually be better informed at the end of it than someone who had been
Really.
conscious the entire time. And so I think about that frequently. I don't want to
Yeah,
add to people's anxiety when there's so much we just don't know.
that's an excellent point. That's a very good point. Jane, I wanted to ask you about, because it comes up every time, in the newsletter and just every time at a conference or a webinar, is in this it's artificial intelligence.
Mm,
So can we talk about AI and rights licensing? Because currently, I know what there are like several dozen lawsuits that are going on right now that are pending between
yes.
content creators and AI companies. And was it yesterday or the day before that Thomson Reuters won the first major AI copyright
Yeah,
suit in the U.S.,
that's correct.
which was
Yes.
notable because the judge threw out the fair use clause. He was like, no.
Yes. Yes.
So,
That was a very unique case. I don't know if I wanna get into the particulars of it because 'cause I'm not an expert on that particular case, but it's
sure.
a very unique case. I would recommend people go look at it because it has to do with making the Thomson Reuters material is, it's related to their Westlaw database, which is about interpreting case law.
Hmm.
Anyway, so AI is another area where it's a high, uh noise to signal ratio, and I'm always debating how much of this do I really report out or try to summarize or analyze because it could change
Hmm.
tomorrow. That said, I am of firm belief that AI licensing is going to be a thing indefinitely, that there are going to be collective licensing agencies that handle the licensing of books and other materials, for
Hmm.
AI models to train on. And I think we're starting to see too some of the different types of licenses that will be understood. Like created by humans is the one that's emerged for the writing and publishing community. This is
Hmm.
started by the former CEO of Scribd or Everand now, if you're familiar
Hmm.
with that ebook subscription service or digital book subscription service. His name's Trip Adler. So he's got a lot of funding for this initiative, and they're partnered with the Authors Guild to offer this
Hmm.
licensing solution directly to authors. So they don't have any AI companies on board yet, but they're now accepting authors who want to sign up and make their materials available for license. So the three licensing types that they're looking at as of today are just
Hmm.
straight AI model training. So this would be, like for a new model that's being developed and they want your books for training. And that
Okay.
would be essentially like a one-time use licensing fee for training that model. And if they want to train a different model or a future model, they have to come back and pay the licensing fee again. Now, how they monitor that, I cannot tell you, but let's assume
Yeah.
they're able to monitor it and how often your material is used to train a model. Um, The other type, which I find very interesting, is the RAG model, or the reference model. So this means using books kind of in real time to help
Hmm.
satisfy queries in AI models. So if someone is trying to do research through an AI model, tell me the best, 5 experts on the publishing industry and cite blah blah blah. Tell me what the best book sales are in this category, whatever. Um, it will come back and give you the information you're looking for with citations that you can actually click on and it will tell you, "Here's the source, here's where it came from," it might quote it. So there's licensing for that now. And if you look at publications like The Atlantic or news journalism organizations, when they're making
Hmm.
these deals with companies like OpenAI, there's often some component of that included, and obviously that has to be on an ongoing basis, because information changes. There's new
Hmm.
information, it's updated, or it goes out of date, or it's pulled down. And so created by humans imagines that's gonna be a monthly sort of fee so that the AI companies will be paying to have continual access if they need to reference it.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
The third type, which they don't offer yet, but this is where I think authors get really, really anxious. Not that the other 2 don't make them anxious, but I think it's the third one that is the stuff of nightmares for some people. This
Hmm.
is, the transformative use
Okay.
license, where your books can be used to create something new. So imagine if Stephen King licensed his entire backlist for transformative use, um, which would allow the person who purchased that license to generate new Stephen King works or works in the style of Stephen King. And then, I guess, depending on what the license says, maybe you could either
Hmm.
share, sell, profit share. I don't know, but that's what we mean by transformative. You're creating some sort of derivative work. It could be an app. It could be some sort of chatbot. You get to
Okay.
chat with Stephen King, the author, because this chatbot's been trained in all of his novels. So there's some interesting, like, I think this is already happening in some
Hmm.
places. Like, you can go, there's some authors who have partnered with AI companies to offer this sort of chatbot or service, or a sort of talk with the book service.
Hmm.
There are a handful of publishers who are experimenting with that when they have authors who are open to it. But I think the thing to underline here is that the default so far, the default understanding is that authors own these rights. They can't be
Okay.
exploited unless permission has been given or there is a license in place. Now the
Okay.
publisher might help facilitate, as HarperCollins did. Like, HarperCollins facilitated a deal. It was with Microsoft for a new training of a new model, and so HarperCollins went to its entire author list and said, "We have this opportunity. This is what you'll be paid. This is the
Hmm.
split. Like, we're going to get some money. You're going to get some money. Are you in? Are you out?" But this could happen through publishers. It could happen through literary agents. It could happen through licensing mechanisms, collective licensing agencies like created by humans. But
Okay.
you will have a choice. And I don't think that just like the Thomson Reuters case, I don't think we're gonna see a landscape where the works are just plucked from pirated databases or
Yeah.
whatever and used to train without the author's permission. It's really hard to imagine that happening given how widespread legal licensing is now. If you take a look at all of the licensing deals that have happened, I mean, there are hundreds at this point with the major models. So I do see, I mean, they're definitely hedging their bets, right? They don't want, when they
Sure.
make these deals, when OpenAI makes a licensing deal, there's a clause in there that says, you're not going to sue us now for any past misdeeds, are you? So this is why, the New York Times, their lawsuit, for those who don't know, they're suing OpenAI. They have not made any sort of agreement to
And
license.
didn't they try to work an agreement before the lawsuit?
They
Weren't they trying
did.
to come up with some? Yeah.
They did. They were trying to come to an agreement, and, the rumor is OpenAI said, "You value your content too highly, you are asking too much," and the New York Times ultimately was offended and like, "Okay, we're gonna sue you now." Um, I think ultimately they probably will settle, um,
Okay.
or I think the New York Times is likely to get a very big payout. We shall see.
That's a good point, though. Has the value of a book been defined yet? Because that's a major sticking point. It
Yeah.
seems like, just a few months ago, we weren't close to knowing what that value is or how it can even be determined. Have we gotten any closer to defining the value of a book or of a data set?
Yeah. I think it's tough because I think it depends on the purpose of the model, the sort
Hmm.
of book that we're talking about,
Hmm.
and what the author demands, just like what the New York Times thought its material was worth. So there are different perceptions, and I don't think there is like a market standard. That said, with HarperCollins, gosh, I'm probably not going to remember the exact figure, but it was what, around $5,000 a title. Someone in the chat can correct
Something
me if
like
I.
that. Yeah, I do
Um,
remember something along those lines.
So to me, I mean, some people saw that figure and they were like, that's insulting. It's disgusting. I can't believe they're getting away with offering such a low figure. And other people who might have, I don't know, 10 or 20 books with HarperCollins that aren't really earning that much money now because it's just
Yeah,
old backlists are like,
yeah,
actually,
backlist
yeah,
stuff.
you know what? I'll take that $25,000 for not doing anything. So, everyone is gonna have a different perspective on this, but I do think it's still a little up in the air, and it's all context driven.
Yeah. Okay, time is flying. I knew this was going to happen with you.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm gonna get some. I was gonna ask some more of my own questions, but I'm like, you know what? Let's get to the audience here. I don't want to be super duper stingy. Let me bring up a question from Debbie Lang. Debbie, thank you for your question and thanks for joining us today. Debbie asks, what is the best way to gain visibility on a tight budget, especially in smaller genres like maybe historical mystery? Do you have anything you can add there, Jane?
Well, actually, I would say the smaller the genre or the more niche, the easier it is on you to
Hmm.
reach those people because the pool of comparable titles or authors is smaller. Generally, if you decide to advertise, which is one way of getting visibility, the fees are going to be lower because you're in a smaller area. Um, but so much here depends on what existing media serves that niche. If you don't want to spend money on advertising, or if your budget doesn't allow for advertising, what I would say is try to find the podcasts that serve that audience. Look for any Substacks or newsletters that serve that audience. Are there any YouTube channels that really drill down into that? So all of that research starts with knowing who your comparable titles or authors are. Um, Hopefully you know that, Debbie. And then once you have some names and titles, I would go into things like Listen Notes, which is a podcast search engine. Look to see where those authors have appeared. Uh, do a Google News search for those titles and authors. Do a Substack search, etc. So just TikTok search, Instagram search, like go down the whole list of media and outlets and look at where the conversations are happening. Look for the message boards, look for the gatherings. And that's where you can get what I would call the more like earned publicity or earned attention, where maybe there's some way you can contribute or be featured. And then if you can't find enough opportunity there, that's when I would move into thinking about advertising, whether that's advertising in some of those places that I mentioned, which I think can be a really good bet. Or if you learn or acquire the skills, you can try some tests on Amazon ads, Facebook ads, BookBub ads. You can look at tools and communities like Story Origin. If you can find other authors in your subgenre, you can do promotions together. You can bundle some free stories or free novellas or free whatever together in an effort to get more people onto your email newsletter list. So those are some of the places that I would start.
Great answer. Great answer. Thank you again for the question, Debbie. Bring up the next one here from Barbara. Barbara, thanks to your question too. Barbara asks, is it legal for an author to use images from an internet site for a research purpose in their book and then publish that book with those images?
Not unless the image is not under copyright. And most images that you find online are in fact protected under copyright. So you have to figure out who the copyright owner is and ask for permission to use it. And they may say, fine, go ahead, make sure you credit me, and they'll give you the credit information, or they may ask you to pay a fee. But I would never assume that images or writing of any kind that you find online is just available for you to use in your own book. You need that permission. Now you can talk about it, like you can say, I found an image at this link that demonstrates my point and not reproduce it in the book. And then you don't have to worry about getting permission. But as soon as you're reproducing something, you do have to ask.
Okay. I'll bring up a question from one of our own Lexi Green asks, what do you think is the biggest way the industry has changed over the last 10 years?
Ooh, that's a big one. Okay,
That is a
so
big one.
2015. I mean, something I've been talking about a lot lately, especially in the last couple years, which doesn't stretch back 10, but I do feel like it's a big difference and something that's been building over time.
Okay.
How traditional publishers are partnering with self-publishing authors. And so I can name probably a dozen authors right now that within the past 2 years have partnered with like Source Books or with
Hmm.
the Big Five to get their print work out into retail channels or for foreign rights or international distribution of some kind. We've seen the growth also of publishers outside of the Big Five that are really adept at working with independent authors, like Podium is one example, and they're not alone. There are others like
Hmm.
them. And, when I started in the industry, not only was there a stigma associated with self-publishing, but it was really hard for self-publishing authors to cross over into traditional, much less,
Yeah.
um, do both traditional and self-publish at the same
Yeah.
time. That is becoming more and more accepted and common and smart for the author to, like, hang on to some portion of their digital rights and then
Mhm.
give, license effectively the print distribution or print rights to a traditional publisher who has that domain mastered. Um, it's, it's so fascinating to me and such a big change because when I look at, let's say, who the top 50 best-selling romance authors right now in the independent space, I guarantee you 90 to 95% of them have a literary agent. Even though I would primarily consider them
Yeah.
an independent author. Now, why do they have an agent? Because they want someone to facilitate rights sales and
That's a
subsidiary rights and all the rest of it.
that's a
And you
great
also
comment. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and you also have literary agents who specialize just in that for indie authors. So, for me, it is one of the best good news stories for authors since I've been in the business.
Fantastic. Do you think that, and this kind of goes back to, I think it was Debbie who asked the question, do you think that the sort of the tried and true way that books are brought to market has changed forever? And what I mean by that is the book launches, the book signings, getting
Yeah.
the New York Times bestseller because of
Yeah.
all of these different alternative media outlets.
Yeah, that has also changed dramatically. I would say it was already if I use the 10-year rule of thumb, it was already changing by 2015, but it's totally different now. I mean, all I have to do is say TikTok and people understand what I mean about, how book discovery has changed because it's book talk that has been driving the at least in part, uh,
Sure.
fiction sales growth. So, there's media fragmentation today. People do not pay
Hmm.
attention to the mainstream media the same way that they did 10 years ago or
Yeah.
20 years ago. Um, the New York Times has even come out and said point blank, a review on the cover of our book review just doesn't sell copies the way it used to.
Yeah. What?
And
Yeah.
so there's just so much more investment in what your community is saying or reading or what this influencer is saying or reading, rather than what does that professional critic say? Like, who cares what the professional critic says? I wanna know what my favorite book talk person says or what my favorite author even
Yeah.
says
Or what my
about
community says.
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I hear book talk, but in my head, I'm hearing influencer because it's not just
Yeah.
book talk; it's influencers
Yes.
in other media as well.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Okay. Gosh, we're already at time. I can't believe it. I just want to remind people where they can find you.
Yes.
janefriedman.com. Write down that website, everybody. I'll give you a second. Do it because there's a ton of resources there. You can find links to her, um, well, to your talks that you're giving, to the upcoming book or the upcoming edition of the book. Let's see. You can find Jane at YouTube by going to
Mhm.
youtube.com at Jane Friedman. Check her out there. And for those of you nonfiction authors out there, you can follow Jane at LinkedIn. Another second to write those down. Jane, thank you so very, very much for being here. I so appreciate you, and I'm sure our audience does too. As a matter of fact, but I'm just going to offer you a monthly guest appearance on Self-Publishing Insiders because this was so helpful. I think it was just so helpful. It was a wonderful, delightful conversation with you. So please come back and visit us as often as you like to talk about whatever you like.
I will. Thank you so much, Jim. I always enjoy talking with you and anyone at Drafted Digital. I really appreciate it.
No, well, we appreciate you too and all the work that you do on behalf of the authors out there. If you can just hang on for a second, I'm going to go through some of our closing statements here. For our audience out there, I noticed some new names in the audience today out there watching and listening. So thank you guys for joining us. Welcome to the community here. For those of you who are watching via YouTube, if you can like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel, we really appreciate it because we get to offer experts like Jane coming on and sharing their wisdom and expertise with you. If you like, You can bookmark d2dlive.com because that'll tell you what the next topic is going to be in subsequent weeks and who the guest is going to be. And then finally, for those of you who are dipping your toe into the self-publishing waters, you can sign up for a free draft to digital account simply by going to draft, that's DRFT, the number 2, digital.com. Jane, if you can hang out just for a second, I'll meet you backstage. We'll have some snacks and a drink. Everybody else, thank you so very, very much for joining. We will hopefully see you next week. And also for those of you who are authors out there, the Smashwords Reading ebook week sale is coming up the first week of March. That's March 2nd through the 8th. Readers, if you're listening and you are a reader, check out the sale because there are a lot of those indie best-selling authors out there who have their books at Smashwords and are going to heavily discount their books. So check that out. We'll see you here again next week. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Ebooks are great, but there's just something about having your words in print. Something you can hold in your hands, put on a shelf, sign for a reader. That's why we created D2D Print, a print-on-demand service that was built for you. We have free, beautiful templates to give your book a pro look, and we can even convert your ebook cover into a full wraparound cover for print. So many options for you and your books. And you can get started right now at draftedigital.com.